Hello guys, here is a grade 9 analysis of Macbeth Act 1. Now, this is detailed. This goes into a lot of detail covering everything in Act 1. So what I want you to do is take your time with this video, pause, slowly make notes, review those notes, and then go over to the website and use the flashcards and use the questions that we've got up there to make sure you properly understand the context behind everything, the meaning and symbolism of everything, and who was doing what, where, when, with who, to whom, and why.
We're going to look at Act 1, Scene 1, with reference to other scenes. So it is important you know the overall plot before looking at quotations to analyse like we will in this video. I want to give you grade 9 analysis, so this means I might talk about other moments in the play too. I will summarise Act 1, Scene 1 in full, but might reference things later on so that you can see any connections or examples of foreshadowing. Because the play starts with witches, it is important that we understand the deliberate choice to include them. So let's first have a look at some context. Now, if you've seen the video exploring the context behind Macbeth as a play, you'll know that a key intention was to support King James for various reasons. Go and watch it if you can because it's really important knowledge. Now, with the inclusion of witches, we also see Shakespeare appealing to James's interests as well as showing support. Now, King James was still only King of Scotland, was totally convinced that witches existed and believed that they were even a threat to him. An example of this is when his wife, from Denmark, had struggled to make it to Scotland by ship following numerous storms that damaged it. King James blamed these storms on witches, who were ultimately, he believed, a force of the devil and out to get him. Witches were blamed for things that at the time were sometimes difficult to explain due to a lack of science. For example, they were blamed for causing illness, death and disaster, and were thought to punish their enemies by giving them nightmares, making their crops fail and their animals become sick, even things like milk going off. And from there began the witch trials in 1591. Typically, vulnerable women such as elderly, widowed or poor women were accused, overall the easiest to blame. As his fascination and fear continued, King James published his study of witchcraft, Demonology, which explored how to hunt a witch and how to punish them. You may have seen in the context video too that King James sought to explain why those tried were often women. He said this here, and in other words, it just means that sex is weaker than man, so it is easier to be fooled and manipulated by the devil, which is proven by the fact that the serpent manipulated Eve in the beginning. The devil was more familiar essentially with women from the start. Now, James I's interest in witchcraft was clearly well known, and it goes without saying that Shakespeare composed Macbeth in 1605 after the Gunpowder Plot or 1606 to please the new King of England. Now, looking at Scene 1 then, we have chaos written all over the scene. We've got thunder and lightning, symbolic of turmoil. We have the phrase hurly-burly, meaning uproar, chaos or tumult. And we have the rhyme and the paradoxical language too. The scene opens with thunder and lightning, with connotations of chaos, destruction and evil. There's an immediate clue to the audience through the use of pathetic fallacy that these characters are threatening. The first witch then asks, "When shall we three meet again?" which is typically something you might ask towards the end of a current meeting, so the scene almost starts in media res, which just means in the middle of action. Shakespeare thrusts us into the chaos of the supernatural, elevating the fear and curiosity of a Jacobean audience even further, almost leaving them no room to breathe. This sets the tone for the play, turmoil and chaos. They are planning to meet when the hurly-burly's done, which we later come to realise is the battle Macbeth is fighting in. The witch's language is paradoxical here, which just means their words almost contradict their other words. And it's when they say the battle's lost and won, because of course how can a battle be lost and won at the same time, unless it's two different groups. It means little to the audience at that point, because it obviously doesn't make any sense, but it could foreshadow the ways Macbeth believes he has won by becoming king later in the play, but his downfall of course is his loss. Next, we have the fact that they plan to meet on the heath where they will then meet Macbeth. This would immediately raise alarm bells in the audience, curious as to why the witches want to target this particular character or this particular man. We then have reference to Grey Malkin and Paddock, a cat and a toad. Witches, bizarrely, were thought to allow the devil to suckle from them in the form of an animal, again heightening the audience's fear as they would recognise these superstitions. And then of course we've just got the stereotypical ideas of witches with cats and toads too. Now we have the line you probably remember most: fair is foul and foul is fair. Again, this is a paradoxical statement, essentially meaning what appears good is bad and what appears bad is good. We could argue this implies that we shouldn't trust everything at face value, which marks the emergence of the theme of appearance versus reality. Foreshadowing is also used here, and only when we come to recognise Macbeth yielding to his fatal flaw do the audience recognise that this was the warning from the witches that whilst he appears good early on, particularly in Act 1 Scene 2 coming up next, he of course descends into darkness. Another clue that might initially be missed by audiences at first is that his language in Act 1 Scene 3 mirrors this very quote, because he says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." Now again, hindsight is a wonderful thing because it's only later do we realise just how many warnings there are early on in the play that this man is going to end up being tyrannical, being dangerous, revealing his foul intentions despite this fair exterior. But there are plenty and there are loads of examples of foreshadowing in this scene, and I really wanted to show them to you. Now one more example is the line "hover through the fog and filthy air." Now looking more closely at the word hover, that serves as a hint towards the witch's supernatural abilities and almost the idea of watching as well. And the words fog and filth emphasise the darkness and concealment we see within the play, because filthy air and fog makes it difficult to see. So it kind of perhaps even connects Lady Macbeth to the witches, because she demands darkness from the spirits in Act 1 Scene 5 as well, so that she can hide the crimes that they plan to commit. Now, of course, there are absolutely loads of things here that I've pointed out to you, and you don't need to remember all of this. I just wanted to give you as much as possible so that when it comes to your exams, you can see all the amazing connections and links throughout the play. So then you aren't just analysing standalone moments and quotations, but you also have the opportunity to analyse and explore changes, clues, and links across the play. This means that you can then be talking about structural things too, like foreshadowing and any shifts. Next up, we're looking at Act 1 Scene 2, and we'll just summarise it first. Now, in Act 1 Scene 2, an injured captain reports back to King Duncan of Scotland on Macbeth and Banquo's valour in battle against Norway. It's important to know that these two aren't directly in this scene, we just hear a glowing report about them. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Now, what is notable here, and isn't often considered, is the fact that in many Shakespeare plays, the monarch leads their army into battle, and here Duncan remains completely unaware of events and, of course, isn't participating directly. It might therefore cause criticism of Duncan, as he seems unable to keep his country in order and his tactics are clearly poor considering the nature of the death and disaster the captain describes. Though we are, of course, sympathetic of Duncan later on, he's clearly a gentle and regal king, he does appear negligent here. Some argue that this criticism of Duncan only serves to support King James in his ability to unite England and Scotland in real life due to his ruling of both. Now in the scene we hear that Macbeth defeats MacDonald, the traitor, and consequently Duncan wishes to reward him with the title of Thane of Cawdor, as Macbeth is currently Thane of Glamis. In a feudal society like the one in which Macbeth is set, the more land you had, the more power you had, and so this is a great reward to Macbeth, as with this reward he can now rule over more land. Now, as I said, Macbeth and Banquo don't appear, we just hear about them, and ultimately this seems deliberate by Shakespeare as a means to really lift our expectations of them, specifically Macbeth of course, asking us to question even further what the witches would want with such a patriotic man. Perhaps this might have resonated with King James, who himself couldn't understand why witches were targeting him, such a noble man. However, the similarities with Macbeth of course do not last long. Now in the captain's speech, he explains the fearlessness of Macbeth and Banquo and their tireless efforts even in the face of potential loss. Now we'll look at this bit in blue on this slide and then we'll look at the rest of it on the next slide, just so we've got some space to really dig deep and annotate some of these lines. Now it starts off with "doubtful it stood," and this emphasises that the Scottish army were clearly at a disadvantage and the battle must have been long-winded since the two armies are spent, or in other words tired. Despite this, and fortune seemingly favouring MacDonald and the swarm of support that the merciless MacDonald had alongside him, the brave Macbeth manages to carve his way through multiple opponents to reach MacDonald. This verb "carve" emphasises the ease at which Macbeth presumably kills and wounds many soldiers in the way. It almost sounds bloodthirsty, like he will stop at nothing to reach MacDonald. You might argue it's also innate, almost instinctive. Now, he brandishes his sword and it metaphorically smokes, revealing how quickly, easily, and ruthlessly he does this. This relentless ability to kill hints at how desensitised to violence Macbeth actually is. The captain also describes Macbeth as being like Valor's minion, a simile which essentially translates to a slave or servant to bravery, suggestive of Macbeth's unwillingness to concede until MacDonald is defeated. This simile is ironic when juxtaposed with hellhound, which is what he is referred to by the end of the play. A hellhound is still a slave or a servant, but a servant to the gates of hell or the underworld. So where early on he is a loyal servant to his country, by the end he is a slave only to hell or even the devil. This is useful if you want to analyse Macbeth's descent into darkness through structural features such as juxtaposition. Next, we have the idea that he wasted no time with pleasantries, shaking hands, or saying farewell. Macbeth simply unseams MacDonald from the nave to the chaps, and fixed his head upon their battlements. The monosyllabic language here again reflects the simplicity and pace of Macbeth's violent acts. It's only with hindsight, when we see how ruthless Macbeth becomes following the murder of Duncan, that we realise that this speech should have been a warning to us as to just how fiercely violent Macbeth can be. Typically, the word unseam might be associated with ripping clothes apart at the seam, again reinforcing the brutal ease of the execution. Finally, MacDonald's head is fixed upon the battlements, which almost seems as if Macbeth is flaunting his brutality. Again, this should be a clue, but we only really make sense of it with hindsight when we see what he becomes later. We are encouraged to think back at these early warnings. Ironically, Macbeth beheading MacDonald mirrors what Macduff does to Macbeth by the end, when he too is a traitor. Macduff is a loyal patriot to Scotland the whole way through the play, and shows what Macbeth could have been by the end. But later, Macbeth instead uses his violence against the king in the rest of the play, rather than for the king like he does here. This ultimately makes the rest of the play all the more tragic, because we see what Macbeth could be: brave, loyal, and the king also refers to him as valiant and worthy in this same scene when he decides to reward him with the title of Thane of Cawdor. So in this video we're going to have a look at Act 1 Scene 3, we'll summarise it and analyse it and look at any contextual factors that affect the narrative in this part of the play. So Act 1 Scene 3 is fairly longer than the two previous scenes, so it is worth just quickly summarising the events. Now in Act 1 Scene 3 it opens with the witches discussing what has happened since their last meeting. The second witch mentions killing swine, or pigs in other words, which reflects fears of the time period, as individuals believed that finding dead pigs was the work of witchcraft. The first witch mentions punishing the husband of a woman who rejected her request for food, again conforming to fears of the time. So he's a sailor and they plan to attack the ship with storms, though are aware they can't actually destroy it. Again, this reaffirms fears of the time, because at the time the most typical charge held against a suspected witch was called mischief following anger, which essentially stemmed from the idea that witches could be turned away when requesting food, for example, and then respond angrily, causing trouble or mischief. If something like a storm happened soon after they had been rejected, it would be assumed that them and their anger were the cause, and therefore charged. So here Shakespeare carefully crafts the scene to warn the audience of the chaos that will ensue should Macbeth listen to these individuals. Next, as a quick summary, Macbeth and Banquo encounter the three witches who prophesy Macbeth's rise to Thane of Cawdor and future kingship, while Banquo is told he will get kings but not be one himself. Now what's significant here is that when they arrive, their arrival is actually signalled by a drum, so it seems deliberate by Shakespeare to mark the arrival of someone significant, in this case Macbeth, our tragic hero. It's almost as if it's a symbolic moment for the audience to recognise. Even Macbeth's first words are significant, because they almost entirely mirror the witch's paradoxical language of Act 1 Scene 1. He says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen," whilst they say fair is foul and foul is fair. His language here seems to, on a surface level, simply suggest the weather is unnaturally foul, but the day is fair, as Scotland are now victorious in battle. On a deeper level, though, it seems to reflect an inner conflict and confusion. He doesn't know how to feel about the day, ultimately foreshadowing his inner conflict later, deciding whether to go ahead and pursue his ambition and power and kill King Duncan. Further to this, the fact that the weather is unnaturally foul sets the tone for an ultimately tumultuous narrative, but he is unable to recognise this in the moments to come. Rather than doubt the witches, he is completely intrigued by their offerings. In coming face to face with the witches, they repeatedly chant All Hail Macbeth, hailing him ultimately with the intention of elevating his sense of superiority and perhaps increasing his trust in them. It's almost as if they know his ambition is his weakness, and so pandering to it by hailing him will surely ignite his curiosity. They tell him he will be Thane of Cawdor, and then king hereafter. Now ultimately, these are bold predictions, and you can debate whether you believe it was the cause of the witches for planting the seed of corruption that leads to his downfall, or if in fact these are self-fulfilling prophecies that he brings about himself. Think back to the tragedy video, where I mentioned A.C. Bradley, who said tragic heroes bring about their own destruction. Banquo is also intrigued and asks them to speak then to me if they can look into the seeds of time, and he is told that he will be lesser than Macbeth and greater. This almost implies that whilst in status he will be considered inferior, he will be greater for resisting corruption and remaining true to his king and country. He is then also told that he'll be not so happy, yet much happier, again suggesting through the comparative adjective happier that he will not suffer psychologically or through damnation. Finally, he is told, Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none, which essentially states that whilst you won't be king, your descendants, or one of them, will be, which later plants the seed of concern for Macbeth that Fleance, Banquo's son, is a threat. This quotation is also seemingly a nod to King James, as it was thought that a real-life Banquo was in fact an ancestor of King James, suggesting that whilst the real Banquo wasn't king, he got a king because King James became one. So this could also be a little nod to King James by Shakespeare there too. Banquo's intrigue is interesting because it does suggest there is a dark side to him, but ultimately he doesn't yield to it as Macbeth does. It highlights the fact that as humans we do have our weaknesses and even the best of us can yield to corruption and evil, but it is ultimately our own morality and free will that decides this. Macbeth demands the imperfect speaker's stay, suggesting he is immediately enchanted by the notion of power. Whether he would care to admit it out loud or not, the curiosity is undoubtedly there. As they disappear, he even seems desperate as he says, would they had stayed, meaning, I wish they had stayed. He seems completely consumed by the prophecies as his conversation with Banquo steers entirely to the witch's words, whilst Banquo seems more concerned with the fact that maybe they have gone insane and are merely hallucinating. He doesn't seem to want to believe it, whereas Macbeth cannot shake the prospect. There are two things that are interesting here. First, Shakespeare juxtaposes the two very early on in the play, ultimately establishing ideas of morality and immorality. And then also, it serves to explain why the perceptive Banquo is so suspicious in Act 3. He will of course have witnessed Macbeth becoming king by then, and will think back to this moment and recognise Macbeth's strange behaviour and intrigue. Shortly after, Ross and Angus confirm Macbeth's new title as Thane of Cawdor, deepening his intrigue and ambition, stirred by the witch's predictions. This is met with immediate shock from Macbeth and Banquo, with Banquo saying, What, can the devil speak true? And Macbeth seems not to immediately believe the news with the words, Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? The use of the word borrowed here indicates a subtle awareness that this title is not suitable for him. He perhaps doesn't feel worthy, as he feels guilty for the early and immediate thoughts of regicide that fill his mind. Ross and Angus of course confirm that the original Thane of Cawdor had betrayed King Duncan, and so Duncan had sent for him to be executed. A little side note here, some people confuse MacDonald and Thane of Cawdor. Confusingly, there are two different traitors. MacDonald is the one that Macbeth kills personally, and the original Thane of Cawdor is executed. Now, Banquo is more conscious and cautious against trusting such supernatural promises. He states that the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence, ultimately stating that the witches are deceiving us with things they know will appeal to us, which will ultimately lead to dire consequences. And he's right. They win over Macbeth, and the consequences are fatal and damning for him. The noun phrase instruments of darkness is interesting here, as not only does it appeal to James's fascination and fear of witches, but it also metaphorically suggests there is a much more evil force at play here, the devil. The witches are merely instruments, and instruments are to be played and used by the musician, in this case the devil. Again, Jacobeans believed that witches were associated with the devil, and so this serves to reaffirm their fears. The witches are planting thoughts of regicide into Macbeth's head, corrupting him into disrupting the great chain of being and going against God. Banquo, on the other hand, as the loyal supposed ancestor of King James, recognises this, whilst Macbeth does not, ultimately showing subtle support for King James once again. Next, I want to talk about Macbeth's aside. These are different to soliloquies. A soliloquy is a speech delivered to the audience alone, whereas an aside can occur whilst other characters are on stage, almost like a pause in the conversation to see inside the character's head. During this aside, whilst the characters of course don't hear it, Banquo recognises Macbeth is rapt, or in other words distracted, again explaining the suspicion later. Now essentially in this aside, Macbeth grapples with the thoughts filling his mind, and certainly feels guilty for even having them at this point. He claims that the predictions cannot be a bad thing or ill, but they can't be a good thing either. He knows they can't be ill or bad, because they'll provide him success, and already have in his new title of Thane of Cawdor. But they can't be good either, because it means King Duncan will have to die for this to happen. He questions, why do I yield to that suggestion? Now this is an interesting quotation, because he essentially asks, if these predictions are so good, why am I giving in to the idea that the king has to die? Well, the word yield means to give in, and the fact he questions himself suggests that he feels weak and powerless, almost like he's blaming some other force, in this case the witches, for taking control of him and making him give in to regicide. It suggests now that he won't be able to stop himself. He also says, why do I, rather than will I or might I, suggesting he's almost confirming it with himself that he's given in to the prospect. However, he then goes on to say that this thought doth unfix his hair, which just means give him goosebumps, and the thought makes his heart knock at his ribs. It quite literally physically terrifies him, and he knows his thoughts are against the use of nature, so he does know that if he follows through with these actions, he's transgressing the natural order, the idea that the king is chosen and is natural, and therefore he's going against God. Macbeth's aside ends with the idea that if chance will have him king, then chance will crown him without his stir, ultimately stating that if it's going to happen, then hopefully the opportunity will arise without his efforts, in this case regicide. Essentially, he hopes fate will take over. Again, however, the thoughts are there, and it is immediately evident from these asides that he is desperately grappling with an internal struggle of morality and immorality. The scene ends with all four men on their way back home after the battle. Macbeth, despite all of his troubling thoughts, says to Banquo they should speak their free hearts each to other. He suggests here he is going to be totally transparent with Banquo and encourages this to be mutual, though we know this not to be the case in the scenes that follow. Okay, so now we're looking at Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. In this scene, we delve deeper into the theme of appearance versus reality, a theme that reflects the socio-political concerns of the Jacobean era, and one that would have resonated with King James I's personal experiences and beliefs. Don't forget, King James was very anxious about succession, so this theme reflects those anxieties, and perhaps even adds to the anxiety, in the sense that it reinforces the idea that you shouldn't trust everything at face value. The scene opens with King Duncan inquiring about the execution of the former Thane of Cawdor, illustrating the gravity of treason in this era. The Thane sets forth a deep repentance and very frankly confessed his treasons, as reported by Malcolm. This emphasises the fatal consequences of disloyalty to the monarch, a concept that would have struck a chord in a period plagued by political conspiracies and the recent memory of the gunpowder plot against King James himself. Furthermore, this expression of remorse from the original Thane of Cawdor serves as an ironic precursor to Macbeth's eventual betrayal. Macbeth has seen firsthand what happens to traitors, both MacDonald and Thane of Cawdor at this point, but this is fatally overlooked by him and is clearly not enough to stop him. Duncan's reflection that there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face is a poignant commentary on the difficulty of discerning true intentions behind a facade, a recurring challenge in James's reign. Now, in other words, all that quotation means is that King Duncan had no idea what the Thane of Cawdor, the original one, was actually planning. Shakespeare's choice of words here aimed to deliberately spark understanding from James, and the fact that the Thane of Cawdor was a gentleman who Duncan built an absolute trust in reflects his naivety and trusting nature. There is a hint of perhaps regret or despondency here, as he clearly did not expect to be let down by someone he had such a strong relationship with. These words underscore the theme of appearance versus reality, illuminating or highlighting Duncan's flaw, his misjudgment of character, which ultimately leads to his demise. Now, perhaps ironically by Shakespeare, upon talking of trust and betrayal, Macbeth enters the scene, along with the others, of course. This might be interesting to look at in a structural sense, foreshadowing the idea that Duncan will shower Macbeth with rewards, completely unable to spot another potential traitor. He calls him worthiest cousin, with the use of the superlative worthiest, again perhaps inflating Macbeth's sense of superiority as the witches did, hailing him in scene 3. And of course, during the encounter with Macbeth and Banquo, Duncan lavishes praise on Macbeth, unaware of his ambitions. Macbeth's response, the service and the loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself, epitomises the ideal of loyalty to a king that was so prevalent in the feudal system, or the system at the time that the play was set. Even as he utters these words, there's a dichotomy between his spoken loyalty and hidden treachery, and that begins to surface, foreshadowing his descent into moral corruption. Now, in this scene, King Duncan announces his son, Malcolm, as the Prince of Cumberland. So this becomes a catalyst for Macbeth's dark ambitions, and when we say catalyst, we almost mean a prompt into action. So in yet another aside, Macbeth reacts to the announcement, perceiving this as a significant obstacle to his own ascensions to the throne. The metaphor of a step vividly conveys the idea of Malcolm's new title as a literal and figurative barrier in Macbeth's path. The imagery of falling or leaping over this step encapsulates Macbeth's options, either to accept his current status and fall, or to ambitiously overleap this obstacle, defying moral and societal norms. The word fall here suggests surrender or failure, which is metaphorical of the idea of decline, both in his status and in his virtue. Macbeth falling from the position of a virtuous hero perhaps mirrors the fall of Lucifer from heaven. In contrast, the word overleap conveys action, determination, and a willingness to transgress boundaries to achieve personal ambition. This dichotomy highlights Macbeth's inner conflict between his loyalty, honour, and the overwhelming lure of power and kingship. Now, just as a side note again, dichotomy just means a contrast between two things. Macbeth's contemplation of overleaping the rightful heir would have been perceived as not only a personal moral failing, but also a societal and religious transgression, which just basically means he would be going against the expectations of those around him and his own religion, because regicide was seen as the ultimate sin. This is a critical moment that captures Macbeth's internal struggle and foreshadows his future actions. This line captures the pivotal moment of choice for Macbeth, embodying the themes of ambition, moral conflict, and the overarching struggle between fate and free will that are central to this tragedy. It serves as a reflection of Macbeth's character and foreshadows the length to which he will go to attain power, resonating with the audience's understanding of human nature and the political and moral context of the era. In the same speech, the phrase "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires" is particularly telling. Here, Macbeth implores or begs the stars above to conceal his malevolent yearnings or desires, a notion that symbolises his wish to mask his inner darkness. The imagery of light and darkness plays a crucial role. If light is symbolic of goodness and purity, and darkness symbolic of evil and concealment, this motif mirrors the public perception of Macbeth as a valiant hero, despite his dark, concealed intentions. Looking more closely at some of the words here, we have words that are pluralised, stars and desires, suggestive of the fact that his desires, and there seem to be multiple now, are so intense that all stars must be hidden, so there is absolutely no light shed on his intentions. If we look at a different idea, in the book of Genesis, there are 7 days of creation by God. The first thing God did was separate the light from the dark, introducing light. So Macbeth, in a sense, becomes an inversion of this creation. If all things light and living come originally from darkness, Macbeth here represents all things black and evil, as he does not wish to emerge from this darkness, and rather keep his evil desires protected and hidden there. And then finally, the fact that these desires are so deep is suggestive of the fact that they are entrenched within him and intensely felt. It is now not something he can easily shake off, they are embedded and fixed in his psyche. Ultimately, this insight into Macbeth's mind underscores the play's exploration of the idea of ambition and its consequences. Macbeth's internal dialogue here is a turning point, signalling his shift from a loyal thane to a figure consumed by his desires and ambitions, setting the stage for the tragic events that follow. Now don't forget, in the context of the Jacobean era, the idea of the divine right of kings was of paramount importance. Duncan's decision to name a successor and Macbeth's reaction would have resonated deeply with audiences who were aware of the recent transition of power from Elizabeth I to her cousin James. The concept of kingship in the play, challenged and corrupted by Macbeth, would have been a potent reminder of the political uncertainties and the importance of legitimate succession during King James's rule. Overall, this scene adeptly weaves personal ambition and political intrigue, setting the stage for the ensuing tragedy. It mirrors the era's anxieties over sovereignty and allegiance, and the dialogue reveals the layers of deception and ambition that drive the plot forward. In Act 1, Scene 5 of Shakespeare's Macbeth, Shakespeare explores the psyche of Lady Macbeth, presenting a character whose ambition and desire for power transcends the conventional limitations imposed by her gender. This scene is pivotal, not only for advancing the plot towards the tragic climax, but also for revealing the intricate layers of Lady Macbeth's character through her soliloquy and interaction with Macbeth. The scene opens with Lady Macbeth reading a letter from her husband, which recounts his strange encounter with the witches and their prophetic words. Her immediate response upon digesting the news of the witches' prophecies is to fear that Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness. Essentially, what she's arguing is that he is too kind to go for what he wants. The metaphor of milk here is traditionally associated with nurturing and femininity, suggesting that Macbeth possesses traits that are antithetical, or the opposite in other words, to the ruthlessness required for usurping the throne. It is ironic that she feels this way about him, since we've already heard of his ruthless and apparently innate ability to kill in such a brutal fashion for his king and country in Act 1, Scene 2. If his actions here are of a feminine and gentle nature, according to Lady Macbeth of course, it serves to prove just how malevolent she believes he must become to commit regicide. It is also very telling on her part. The fact she thinks he is too kind at the moment magnifies just how Machiavellian she is herself in comparison. Lady Macbeth's contemplation of her husband's kind nature underscores her own contrasting attitude, one that aligns less with nurturing and more with cold-heartedness. When linking this to the era and religion, the biblical instruction from 1 Timothy chapter 2, "But I suffer not a woman to teach nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence," implies clear boundaries for women, emphasising submission and prohibiting them from assuming positions of authority or instruction over men. This directive, deeply rooted in the cultural and religious context of its time, asserts that women should remain in a state of quietude, particularly in matters of teaching and authority, which were traditionally reserved for men. In stark contrast to this, Lady Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 5 of Macbeth exemplifies a woman who not only seeks to teach and influence her husband, but also aspires to usurp the conventional authority vested in male figures. Her sinful machinations and her manipulation of Macbeth to achieve her ends directly oppose the biblical suggestion of women's silence and submissiveness. In the same soliloquy, the phrase "hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear" vividly captures Lady Macbeth's intent to manipulate Macbeth, to infuse him with the resolve that she thinks he is lacking. This metaphor of pouring suggests submission from Macbeth. He is passive while she is active. She wants to poison him with her own dark desires and ambitions, further establishing her as the more dominant force within their relationship. Following this, Lady Macbeth hears from a servant that the king will be coming to stay at their castle the very same night, where of course she sees immediate opportunity. In this soliloquy, she commands spirits to rid her of any emotion, including remorse, to allow her to corrupt Macbeth and commit regicide. Lady Macbeth articulates her desire to be unsexed and calls on the spirits to fill her with cruelty, and here she is actively rejecting the passive and obedient role allotted to women. A common misunderstanding of the quote, "Come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here," is that Lady Macbeth commands the spirits to allow her to transition so she can live as a man. However, she is in fact asking for any limitations of her current character to be removed, as she feels at present that both her as a physical woman and Macbeth, with his arguably gentle feminine qualities and the milk of human kindness, are constraining them from what they could be. Furthermore, her association with the spirits and the dunnest smoke of hell aligns her with the supernatural, reflecting contemporary fears of witchcraft and the subversion of the natural order. She also urges the spirits to "come to my woman's breast and take my milk for gall." Lady Macbeth not only reinforces her rejection of traditional femininity here, but also embraces a transformation that aligns her with the attributes of bitterness and cruelty, symbolised by gall, or in other words, poison. This transformation is symbolic of her inner turmoil and her willingness to forsake her inherent nature and ability to give nourishment and life to any potential infant to achieve power and status. Other elements of this soliloquy command for darkness, with lines such as "come thick night" and "pour thee in the dunnest smoke of hell" paralleling Macbeth's request previously for the stars to hide his black and deep desires in scene 4. The idea of darkness acting as concealment is repeated throughout the play. Interestingly, she also wants to ensure that the darkness is so thick that heaven cannot peep through the blanket of the dark, presumably to conceal their crimes and intentions from God. She naively thinks this is possible, considering God is seen to be omniscient, or all-knowing in other words. But it does reflect that maybe she hasn't completely lost all sense of morality, which does connect later with the way that her guilt consumes her by Act 5. As Macbeth arrives, she hails him and refers to him as "Great Glamis, worthy Cawdor," mimicking the same inflation of his ego that the witches offered in scene 3. Some critics see Lady Macbeth as the fourth witch, and this may serve as evidence as to why. This deliberate mirroring of language does seem deliberate by Shakespeare too, considering James's belief that women were more likely to be corrupted by the devil, and therefore engage in witchcraft. I've spoken about this before in one of the context videos, but essentially what he argues is that women are more likely to be corrupted by the devil, just as Eve was by the serpent. Her manipulation extends to her advice to Macbeth, to look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it. It illustrates Lady Macbeth's strategic abilities, her understanding of the necessity of duplicity in their murderous quest. Lady Macbeth's assertion of influence over Macbeth, encouraging him to conceal his true intentions and present a facade of innocence, exemplifies her role as a teacher or mentor, albeit in a questionable way. She instructs Macbeth not only in how to deceive others, but also in how to reject his own morality and conscience, thereby teaching him to embrace ambition and ruthlessness over virtue and loyalty. Now, you've probably heard of this quotation, and it is a very popular one, so it's important to be critical with it so your analysis stands out above others. Firstly, this quotation further supports the previous idea that she subverts cultural and religious expectations of women, as she assumes a role of authority and instruction, guiding and shaping her husband's actions in a manner expressly forbidden for women, according to the passage mentioned previously. You've got to look at single words in this quotation. Now, when you look at quotations with concrete images in like this one, you want to zoom in on it literally first. So what are this thing's qualities? What does it have, or what does it do? And then you want to think with those qualities, what does it metaphorically or symbolically mean in this context? So when we look at flowers, for example, its qualities are that they are delicate, beautiful, typically feminine and natural. And then, when we consider the fact that Lady Macbeth is saying they should look this way, she is of course suggesting that they look delicate, natural, and therefore innocent. Contrastingly, the metaphor "be the serpent under it" is a command from Lady Macbeth to conceal their evil intentions. The same process of zooming in applies. A serpent is typically associated with cunning, evil, and the devil, so symbolically here Macbeth must hide his cunning and evil. You want to imagine quotation analysis as a maths equation. Yes, we know this quotation suggests they should look kind and innocent and hide their evil, but you must break it down and work out exactly how it shows you this for the marks, as this is how you explore the effect of writers' language choices. Now a little deeper still. This line connects to biblical imagery of deception and sin, evoking images of the serpent from the Garden of Eden, and reinforces the theme of appearance versus reality that repeatedly appears throughout the play. We could imagine Lady Macbeth as Eve, allowing herself to be corrupted by spirits, and Macbeth as Adam, who similarly concedes to his partner. Just as Adam and Eve commit the original sin and invite further evil into the world, so do Macbeth and Lady Macbeth by committing regicide. Throughout the rest of the play, their fall from honour mirrors this story too, as they are punished mentally, they are punished by God, and face death. Now finally, this quotation seems a deliberate reference from Shakespeare to a coin created to commemorate the discovery of the gunpowder plot, so this is something else you could talk about. On the coin was a snake hidden amongst flowers. The snake, of course, resembling the plotters, and the flowers representing innocence and a facade. This allusion cannot be coincidental from Shakespeare, considering the play came only a year after the discovery of the plot. There are numerous nods to King James throughout the play, and this is a fairly transparent one that seems to foreshadow that, much like the gunpowder plot, this will be uncovered too, ultimately acting as a way to discourage transgression of the king. In this sense, the play acts as royalist propaganda. In contrast to Lady Macbeth's manipulative words, Macbeth's minimalistic response, "we will speak further," reflects his passivity at this stage of the narrative. This power imbalance, manifesting even in the contrasting length of dialogue, underscores the extent of Lady Macbeth's influence and foreshadows her role in propelling Macbeth toward his eventual moral descent. Analysing this scene within the context of the Jacobean era, we should consider the societal anxiety surrounding witchcraft, gender roles, and the natural order. Lady Macbeth, in her unbridled ambition and rejection of femininity, embodies Jacobean fears, challenging the patriarchal norms and illustrating the play's engagement with themes of power, ambition, and moral corruption. Through her subversive character, Shakespeare engages with contemporary debates about gender and authority, presenting a figure who defies the constraints of her time to pursue her own ends. In doing so, Lady Macbeth becomes a symbol of the potential for women to exercise agency and influence, even in a world that seeks to confine them to silence and obedience. And the word agency just means the ability to make her own choices. In conclusion, Lady Macbeth's language in this scene is a powerful testament to her complex character, marked by a significant desire for power and a willingness to transgress moral boundaries to achieve her ends. Through her character, and in your essays, you can be critical of her character and consider whether Shakespeare was an early feminist, what we might actually call a proto-feminist, because on the one hand he displays characters like her, ones with agency and fearlessness. Her character seems to demonstrate that ambition and the desire for power can transcend gender constraints. However, in a time plagued by beliefs of witches, typically women, you could also argue that he is only serving to reinforce negative stereotypes and fears of women with too much power in this era. So in this section, I'm going to combine scenes 6 and 7 because there's only a few things I want to gloss over in scene 6. And scene 7 is huge for exploring Macbeth's deteriorating sense of morality and inner turmoil and conflict. In the scenes, Shakespeare navigates the themes of ambition, guilt, and deception. Through the masterful use of language, metaphor, and biblical allusion, these scenes not only advance the plot, but also delve deep into the complexities of human nature and the perilous path of unchecked desire and ambition. In scene 6, King Duncan arrives at the Macbeth's castle, and this is almost a thank you to them for Macbeth's efforts in battle. He obviously wants to honour him by being there. He remarks that Macbeth's castle hath a pleasant seat, and all he's saying there is that it looks welcoming and it looks comfortable and it looks homely, and we want to explore the dramatic irony here. Don't forget, this is just when the audience are aware of something a character isn't aware of. The audience, who are now aware of the murderous intentions of Macbeth and his wife, will recognise the contrast between Duncan's naive perceptions of the castle and the actual grim reality that awaits him. The irony is further compounded by Lady Macbeth's deceptive politeness, a facade that masks her dark ambitions. She comments, "All our service in every point twice done and then done double," implies that even if their efforts were doubled, they could still not do enough for him. She is of course being duplicitous here, or two-faced in other words, creating a false sense of safety and security for Duncan. Interestingly, this language also mimics the language of the witches in Act 4, Scene 1, with the famous line, "Double, double, toil and trouble," which further enhances the theory that Lady Macbeth, according to some critics, can be seen as a fourth witch. Now, the seeming safety and warmth of the setting stand in stark contrast to the evil machinations, or plan, in other words, that's being woven, and it exemplifies Shakespeare's exploration of the theme of appearance versus reality, which has come up a couple of times in scenes we've already explored. Shakespeare's decision to cloak the Macbeth's malevolent plans in hospitality and kindness serves to heighten the suspense and the horror for his audience, reflecting the Jacobean fascination with the duplicitous nature of humanity. We get that fascination comes from the recent events just before the play came out in 1606. In 1605 there was, of course, the Gunpowder Plot. So it's all very, very close to home and of course displays the gravity of such a sinful act. Now as we get to Act 1, Scene 7, Macbeth's soliloquy captures his internal struggle with the act of regicide. His opening lines, "If it were done, when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly," reveals his desire to persevere with the deed, as if swiftness could somehow reduce the weight of his plans. The euphemism "it" for the act of killing Duncan underscores Macbeth's reluctance to confront the full horror of his contemplated action directly. This linguistic choice from Shakespeare hints at Macbeth's deep-seated unease and foreshadows the psychological turmoil that will plague him. Somewhere within him he knows this is wrong, but of course we know it's not enough to stop him. Furthermore, Macbeth's reflection on the consequences of his actions, when he says, "We still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor," speaks to a recognition of divine justice, or, at the very least, the inevitable backlash of his violent deeds. Now this quotation just essentially means that he knows that what he does has consequences. And this awareness of even-handed justice serves as a reminder of the biblical principle of reaping what one sows. You may have heard of that phrase before. If someone tells you that you reap what you sow, it just means that you eventually have to face up to the consequences of your actions. So he is aware of the consequences of his actions, but again, it's not really enough to stop him, as we know. I do want to annotate the phrase bloody instructions, because the use of that phrase is yet another euphemistic one. You can just see there at the bottom I've put euphemism is when there are softer words used in place of more offensive ones, usually so that you don't sound so offensive or rude, but in this case it's used because he can't say the word murder out loud. It's almost like he has to accept it if he does. And when we pair it with the word plague, or the verb plague, we should consider the connotations of this. So a plague, as we know, is literally a disease, and so metaphorically this exposes regicide as a disease that will lead to Macbeth's downfall, which of course is what happens. Now on a more symbolic level, thinking outside of the play, it serves as yet another warning to the audience about the consequences of regicide. And ironically, Macbeth is aware of these risks, the risks of these machinations or evil plans, but he is bound by his vaulting ambition, which it says later on in this soliloquy. And it's a feeling so potent or powerful, in other words, that it threatens to propel him towards his own death or downfall. Now, the acknowledgement of Duncan being at the castle in double trust highlights Macbeth's awareness of his moral and social obligations to King Duncan. He knows who he should be towards the king, and this contrasts sharply with his murderous intentions. Essentially, what he's saying here is that Duncan trusts him in two ways. Firstly, that Macbeth is both his kinsman and his subject, so he should therefore serve Duncan as such. And this moment of clarity where Macbeth sees himself as Duncan's subject and host illustrates the inherent conflict between his ambition and his sense of duty. And then secondly, the other reason is Macbeth says that Duncan should feel safe at the castle. Macbeth should be the one to shut the door against a murderer, not bear the knife himself. And that use of the word should there in this context illuminates the discrepancy or the differences between what Macbeth knows is right and his ambition. And this captures the play's moral ambiguity. Now finally, the soliloquy finishes with the imagery of a spur. You can see that at the top there, it's a pointed device or sharp spiked wheel fixed to the heel of a horse rider's boot to enable him to urge his horse onwards. Now Macbeth states that I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition which overleaps itself and falls on the other. And that essentially means that the only reason he has to go through with this act is his ambition. But he's aware that if he overleaps, he will ultimately fall. Now we could argue the thing that he must overleap is Malcolm, who has of course been named Prince of Cumberland should Duncan die. And the Prince of Cumberland is the heir to the throne, and in this case that's Malcolm, that's Duncan's son. Now it's not just Duncan he has to deal with, obviously it's Malcolm too in this case, which makes the task all the more risky. The notion of ambition that overleaps itself poignantly captures Macbeth's conflicted psyche. He's torn between his desire for power and the recognition of its potential to lead to his downfall. And in this final utterance, it seems he has completely talked himself out of regicide. Now, upon Lady Macbeth's entrance, he actually seems really resolute and final in his decisions by stating, "We will proceed no further in this business. He hath honoured me of late." And that just means that King Duncan has rewarded Macbeth with Thane of Cawdor, and that is enough for Macbeth. The modal verb will here underscores the seemingly determined nature of his words. By hearing him say that, he actually seems really, really determined, and there seems to be no doubt in his mind. And this is probably quite pleasing for a Jacobean audience to witness that kind of change of decision, considering what they believed about kings and queens at the time. However, as we know, Lady Macbeth challenges Macbeth's faltering intentions with really scornful and hateful manipulation. Her rhetorical questions, "Are you a man?" and the taunting simile of the cat in the adage underscores her contempt for Macbeth's hesitance, effectively questioning his manhood and character. When she compares him to the cat in the adage, this is actually an allusion to a proverb, adage just means proverb, where a cat wants to eat fish but doesn't want to enter the water and get her paws wet. And essentially the moral of that story is that laziness is not going to help you achieve your desires. It's almost implying that what you want isn't going to come to you without your stir, which is actually what he hopes for in Act 1, Scene 3 when he first hears the prophecies. If you remember, he says, "If chance may have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir." So she's criticising him for his passive attitude and suggests that he must fight himself for what he most desires. Now, by challenging his manhood and even referring to him as a coward, Macbeth can only reply with, "Prithee peace, I dare do all that may become a man, and who dares do more is none." And here where he says "Prithee peace," he's literally saying, "I pray you stop." There's desperation in his tone as he doesn't want to hear any more. Perhaps this is because he knows he will yield or give in to her, as he was never really determined to back out of the murder in the first place. Or it's because he is hurt by her cruel emasculation of him. Either way, it exposes a clear power imbalance, and it seems even he is aware of the power that she holds over him. This dynamic between the two characters illuminates the power struggle within their relationship, with Lady Macbeth assuming a dominant and almost predatory role in her pursuit of power. So her manipulation continues, and her willingness to commit infanticide, or kill a child in other words, if she had promised to do so, really starkly illustrates her ruthlessness and the depth of her manipulation. This is a really chilling declaration. She says, "I have given suck and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me." But then this is juxtaposed with, I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. Now, this really, really maternal, what should be a really special moment for a mother and child, juxtaposed with her willingness to dash the brains out of her own child for the sake of her ambition, showcases Lady Macbeth's willingness to defy any maternal instinct, further complicating the play's exploration of gender and power. Don't forget, this quotation is simply stating that if she had promised to do something as evil as murder her own child, she would do it because she would never break a promise, no matter how severe it was. So therefore Macbeth shouldn't either. This is probably one of the most despicable things said by her character in the play, and she is masterful in her manipulation. Now the audience at this point would undoubtedly be horrified by her character, considering women at the time were meant to be pious or religious, subservient to their husbands and maternal too. Now, I've already pointed this out, but Macbeth's responses in this exchange are minimal, and the structure by Shakespeare has to be deliberate. Lady Macbeth's comments present her as completely chastising his weak nature, and his minimalistic replies show who holds more power in this moment. He merely replies to this horrific image of promise with, "if we should fail," which reveals he is now reconsidering the plan, but almost reluctantly. Lady Macbeth then offers the solution, stating that they won't fail because she has a plan to ensure that the two chamberlains, or two guards outside Duncan's bedroom, are completely drunk, and so they will not be able to defend themselves. They will be covered in the blood of Duncan, so it will be made to look like their crime. Macbeth's eventual acquiescence or reluctant acceptance of her plans, underscored by his remark about bringing forth men children only after this conversation, reflects not only the fact that he is given in to Lady Macbeth, but also that he now recognises her lack of stereotypical femininity too. He's essentially saying that you should only ever have sons as children because you are far too lacking in feminine quality and maternal instinct to have daughters. So it's almost as if he's quite shocked by what's been said by Lady Macbeth. The scene ends with his willingness to commit the deed, and he states, "False face must hide what the false heart doth know." And this really encapsulates the level of their deceit, setting the stage for the catastrophic events that follow, and once again conforms to the theme of appearance versus reality. Shakespeare ends on this poignant and cold note, creating fear within the audience, as they are obviously aware of the sinful act of regicide and the consequences of that in that era. Now, we've seen the theme of appearance versus reality appear a lot already in the play so far. We've had fair is foul and foul is fair, look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it. And ironically, we've had King Duncan in Act 1 Scene 4 say there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. So even he knows that people have tricked him in the past. That's the Thane of Cawdor, the original one. And he is ironically about to let the second Thane of Cawdor do it again. Now, in this scene, it's all about ambition, guilt, and deception. Shakespeare almost presents commentary on the human condition. And what I mean by that is the way that our minds work, the way that we can be tricked or fooled, or our kindness and our sense of morality. Through Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's tragic descent, Shakespeare specifically explores the poisonous effects of ambition and the perilous duality of appearance versus reality. It's offering a reflection on the nature of evil and the human capacity for deception as well. This scene is really, really great for exposing Macbeth's descent into darkness and him conceding to his ambition or his hamartia. Don't forget, this play is a tragedy, and this is where we most clearly start to see our tragic hero's hamartia take hold of him. Yes, we've seen glimpses of it since The Witch's predictions, but this is where it really seems to be more final. So make sure you get to know this scene really well if you are talking about Macbeth's hamartia or Lady Macbeth's Machiavellian nature as well.
Ouch! This is why in some videos I explain scratches.